Picture this, a world submerged beneath endless waves, where the only remnants of civilization cling to the tops of mountains or drift on makeshift rafts. This isn't just the plot of a disaster movie, it's a story told by cultures across the globe, from the Epic of Gilgamesh in ancient Mesopotamia to the flood myths of the Maya, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, and even the indigenous tribes of the Amazon. What's chilling isn't just the scale of these tales, but their uncanny similarities. How is it possible that societies separated by oceans and millennia all share such strikingly parallel stories of a cataclysmic deluge? Could these legends be more than just myths? Could they be echoes of a real, earth-shattering event buried deep in humanity's collective memory? That's the mystery we're diving into today, inside the Great Flood myths, tracking real history behind ancient legends. This isn't just about retelling old stories. It's about peeling back layers of time to uncover the truth hidden beneath them. Imagine standing on the shore of the Black Sea, where geologists have found evidence of a sudden, massive flood around 7,000 years ago, a flood that matches the timing and scale of legends from the region. Or consider the submerged ruins off the coast of India, where underwater structures hint at a lost city swallowed by the sea. These aren't just coincidences, they're clues, pieces of a puzzle that connects mythology to reality. And the implications are staggering. If these floods really happened, they could rewrite our understanding of human history, revealing how our ancestors survived, adapted, and passed down these traumatic events as cautionary tales. So join me on a journey that bridges the gap between myth and science, where archaeologists, geologists, and historians are piecing together a story far older than written records. We'll explore ancient texts, dive into underwater discoveries, and even decode the symbolism hidden in these flood narratives. What emerges isn't just a tale of destruction, but a testament to human resilience. How cultures separated by time and space turned catastrophe into legend, ensuring the memory of these events survived for thousands of years. By the end, you might never look at these ancient stories the same way again, because sometimes the most fantastical myths are the ones that hold the deepest truths. Ready to uncover them, let's begin. One of the most striking patterns in human storytelling is how flood myths appear in nearly every corner of the ancient world. Take the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh, where the hero Utnapishtim is warned by a god to build a massive boat before the waters rise. Sound familiar? The parallels to Noah's Ark are uncanny, right down to the release of birds to find dry land. But it doesn't stop there. In Hindu tradition, the sage Manu is saved by a giant fish that guides his ship through the deluge. The indigenous Maya of Guatemala tell of a great flood sent by the gods to wipe out humanity, sparing only a chosen few. Even in China, the legend of Gun and Yu describes a world drowned by relentless waters, with heroes struggling to control the chaos. What's fascinating isn't just the recurrence of these stories, but their shared DNA. Almost every version includes a few key ingredients: a divine warning, a survival vessel, whether it's an ark, a raft, or even a giant gourd, and the idea of rebirth, a fresh start for humanity after the waters recede. How could cultures separated by continents and centuries all dream up such similar tales? Scholars have wrestled with this question for generations. Some argue these stories spread through ancient trade routes, passed like a game of telephone across civilizations. Others suggest it's something deeper, a shared human response to trauma, a way to make sense of natural disasters that once reshaped our world. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Geologists have uncovered evidence of massive flooding events that align eerily well with these myths. Take the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, which proposes that around 7,600 years ago, rising sea levels burst through a natural dam, flooding an area the size of Ireland in a matter of months. Could this be the real-life catastrophe behind the Mesopotamian flood legends? Or consider the Younger Dryas period, roughly 12,800 years ago, when melting glaciers triggered sudden, catastrophic floods across multiple continents. These weren't just local disasters, they were global upheavals, the kind of events that would have been seared into the collective memory of early human societies. The more we examine these myths through the lens of science, the harder it becomes to dismiss them as mere fiction. They might not be literal accounts, but they could very well be ancestral warnings, wrapped in symbolism and passed down through generations. Imagine survivors of these ancient floods huddled around fires, telling their children and grandchildren about the day the waters rose, stories that evolved over millennia into the epic tales we know today. That's the power of myth. It's not just entertainment, but a survival tool, a way to encode vital knowledge in unforgettable narratives. So the next time you hear the story of Noah or Manu or Utnapishtim, remember, you might be listening to the echoes of something far older, far realer than you ever imagined. Among the most tantalizing geological discoveries supporting ancient flood myths is the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, proposed by Columbia University scientists William Ryan and Walter Pittman in the late 1990s. This theory suggests a catastrophe of biblical proportions actually unfolded around 5,600 years before the Common Era. Here's how it might have happened. As the last ice age faded, melting glaciers caused global sea levels to rise, putting immense pressure on the narrow strip of land separating the Mediterranean from the freshwater Black Sea basin. Then, in what geologists describe as a catastrophic breach, the natural dam at the Bosporus Strait gave way. Seawater thundered in with 200 times the force of Niagara Falls, submerging over 60,000 square miles of land, an area larger than Florida, in less than a year. The evidence for this event is etched into the seafloor itself. Sediment cores drilled from the Black Sea reveal a dramatic shift. Layers of freshwater mollusks abruptly replaced by saltwater species. Underwater sonar mapping has uncovered what appear to be ancient shorelines nearly 400 feet below today's surface, along with submerged river channels that once wound through now drowned valleys. Most haunting of all are the potential human traces, rectangular features near the Turkish coast that some archaeologists interpret as the remains of stone structures, possibly marking settlements swallowed by the flood. What makes this theory so electrifying is its cultural ripple effects. The timing aligns uncannily with the earliest known flood myths from Mesopotamia, including the Sumerian tale of Ziusudra, which later evolved into the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Black Sea region was home to some of Europe's first farming communities, and a disaster of this scale would have sent survivors fleeing in all directions, carrying traumatic memories that could have seeded flood narratives across multiple cultures. Imagine a group of refugees arriving in Mesopotamia, telling breathless accounts of how the gods opened the fountains of the great deep, a phrase that appears verbatim in both the Bible and much older Babylonian texts. Yet not all scientists are convinced. Critics point out that the flooding may have been more gradual, unfolding over centuries rather than months. Some argue the submerged structures could be natural formations and that the sediment data tells a more complex story. But even skeptics acknowledge that the Black Sea event, whether sudden or slow, would have dramatically reshaped the lives of coastal societies. Whether it directly inspired specific myths may remain debated, but it stands as a powerful example of how real geological upheavals can filter into cultural memory. After all, when your entire world vanishes beneath the waves, that's not just a story you tell, it's a legacy you carry. And perhaps that's why these flood myths feel less like fiction and more like ancestral postcards from the edge of oblivion. Let's turn our attention to ancient Mesopotamia, where the world's oldest surviving flood story was etched into clay tablets over 4,000 years ago. The Epic of Gilgamesh isn't just an adventure tale, it's a window into how one civilization grappled with the terrifying power of water. In the 11th tablet, the hero Gilgamesh meets Utnapishtim, a man who survived a divine flood by building a massive, cube-shaped ark at the command of the god E. Sound familiar? The parallels to Noah's Ark are impossible to ignore. A righteous man warned by a deity, a vessel packed with animals, even the release of birds to test the receding waters. But here's what's fascinating: the Gilgamesh version predates the biblical account by at least 1,000 years. Archaeologists digging in the ruins of Ur, one of Mesopotamia's great cities, uncovered a 10-foot-thick layer of silt dating back to around 2,900 years before the Common Era. This wasn't just seasonal river flooding, it was a catastrophic deluge, one that left entire neighborhoods buried under mud. Similar deposits have been found at other Sumerian sites like Shuruppak and Kish, hinting at a series of devastating floods across the region. Could these real disasters have inspired Utnapishtim's story? The tablets themselves offer clues. Unlike the Bible's global flood, the Mesopotamian version describes a localized event, with waters covering the land like a cloak, but not the entire world. What's even more revealing is how the story evolved as it traveled. The earliest Sumerian flood myths, like the tale of Ziusudra, described the survivor as a king-priest rewarded with eternal life. By the time the Babylonians adapted it into Gilgamesh, he'd become Utnapishtim, a wise old man living at the ends of the earth. And when these tales reached the Hebrews during their exile in Babylon, they transformed again, blending Mesopotamian details with their own theology. The ark's dimensions shifted from a cube to a more seaworthy rectangle. The number of birds released increased from 3 to 4, and most importantly, the reason for the flood changed. In Gilgamesh, the gods send the waters on a whim, annoyed by human noise. In Genesis, it's a moral reckoning, a divine reset for a corrupt world. This cross-cultural borrowing shows how flood myths weren't just static legends but living stories, reshaped by each society that retold them. The Mesopotamians saw floods as capricious acts of temperamental gods, while later cultures framed them as moral lessons. Yet beneath these differences lies a shared human impulse to explain the unexplainable, to find meaning in catastrophe. When we read Utnapishtim's account today, we're not just decoding ancient poetry. We're listening to the echoes of real people who stood where the Tigris and Euphrates overflowed, watching their world vanish beneath the waves and turning that terror into something enduring. And that's the power of these myths. They're not just about destruction, but about how humanity rebuilds, remembers, and ultimately survives. The story of Noah's Ark is one of the most enduring narratives in human history, a tale of divine judgment and miraculous survival that has captivated generations. But beneath its familiar surface lies a web of questions. Was this a literal account of a global deluge, or something more symbolic? The book of Genesis describes a flood so vast it covered all the high mountains under the entire heavens, with Noah's family and a menagerie of animals floating safely in a massive wooden vessel. For centuries, believers and skeptics alike have debated whether this was historical fact or profound allegory. Archaeological expeditions have long sought physical proof of the Ark, particularly on Turkey's Mount Ararat, where tradition claims the ship came to rest. Explorers have reported sightings of mysterious wooden structures embedded in glaciers, and satellite imagery has sparked theories about anomalies on the mountain slopes. Yet none of these claims have yielded definitive evidence: no timber with ancient tool marks, no artifacts linking to the biblical timeline. The challenges are immense. Ararat's treacherous terrain, shifting ice, and the sheer span of time make verification nearly impossible. Even if remnants were found, could we ever confirm they belonged to the Ark? This absence of physical evidence has led scholars to consider alternative interpretations. Some theologians argue the flood story isn't a weather report but a moral lesson, a parable about obedience, redemption, and divine mercy. The Ark, in this view, becomes a metaphor for salvation, a vessel carrying humanity through chaos toward renewal. Others propose a middle ground, that Genesis preserves the memory of a real, catastrophic regional flood, magnified over generations into a global event. The Mesopotamian floodplain, where Abraham's journey began, was no stranger to devastating inundations. Could Noah's story be a cultural echo of those disasters, reshaped to convey deeper spiritual truths? Then there's the striking resemblance to older flood myths like Gilgamesh, which we've already explored. The parallels: divine warnings, ark building, birds sent to scout for land, are too close to dismiss as coincidence. Many historians suggest that Hebrew scribes, during their exile in Babylon, encountered these Mesopotamian tales and adapted them, infusing them with their own monotheistic theology. Instead of capricious gods flooding the world on a whim, the biblical account presents a righteous God punishing corruption but preserving a remnant for rebirth. This adaptation wouldn't undermine the story's power. It would reveal how ancient cultures repurposed shared memories to answer profound questions about justice, survival, and the human condition. So where does that leave us? The beauty of Noah's Ark may lie in its duality. It doesn't have to be either history or allegory to resonate. For some, it's a testament of faith in divine providence. For others, a timeless narrative about resilience in the face of catastrophe. Whether the floodwaters once rose to the peaks of Ararat or not, the story's true anchor isn't in geological strata, but in its enduring power to make us ask, when the waters rise in our own lives, what will we choose to carry forward? And how will we rebuild when they recede? Far to the east of Mesopotamia, in the ancient Sanskrit texts of India, we find another remarkable flood narrative, the story of Manu and the cosmic deluge. The Matsya Purana tells of a virtuous king named Manu who, while washing his hands in a river, rescues a tiny fish. The fish reveals itself as an incarnation of the god Vishnu and warns Manu of an impending flood that will drown the world. Instructed to build a massive boat and gather seeds of all plants, Manu survives the rising waters as the fish grows to gigantic proportions, towing his vessel to safety on the slopes of the Himalayas. What makes this account particularly fascinating is its possible connection to real environmental upheavals in the Indus Valley civilization. Around 4,000 years ago, this advanced society, known for its meticulously planned cities like Mohenjo-Daro, began to collapse. Geological evidence suggests a dramatic shift in monsoon patterns, causing the once reliable Saraswati River to dry up while other rivers, like the Indus, may have flooded catastrophically. Imagine entire cities abandoned as farmlands turned to salt flats or were swallowed by silt. Could Manu's fish, guiding him through turbulent waters, symbolize ancestral memories of navigating these ecological crises? The Puranas describe the flood as a moment of cosmic reset pralaya, where the old world dissolves so creation can begin anew. Unlike the punitive floods of Mesopotamia and the Bible, the Hindu tradition frames the deluge as part of a cyclical divine order. The fish avatar isn't just a lifeguard but a teacher, preserving not just life but knowledge, Vedic hymns, medicinal herbs, the blueprint of civilization itself. This reflects a profound cultural difference. Where Western myths often portray floods as divine retribution, Indian philosophy views them as natural phases in the universe's rhythm, like the ebb and flow of tides. The emphasis isn't on punishment but on continuity, how wisdom endures even when the material world washes away. Now, let's cross the Pacific to the Americas, where indigenous flood stories carry their own distinctive flavor. The Aztecs spoke of a world destroyed by water, where only a man named Coxcoxtli and his wife survived by hollowing out a cypress tree. In the Andes, the Incas told of a great Yunu Pachacuti, water that overturns the land, sent by the god Viracocha to cleanse humanity's corruption. Meanwhile, the Haida people of the Pacific Northwest describe Raven releasing the tides from a clamshell, flooding the earth until only mountaintops remained. What's striking here is how these narratives adapt to local landscapes. In mountain-rich Peru, survivors climb peaks. In forested Mesoamerica, they take refuge in trees. Some tales even incorporate Ice Age memories, like the Mapuche legend of Trentrenvilu, a serpent whose movements caused glacial meltwaters to rise. These aren't cookie-cutter myths but culturally specific survival manuals, encoding real environmental wisdom. When the Haida speak of Raven holding back the waters, they're preserving knowledge of tsunamis. When the Inca describe Viracocha's flood, they may be recalling El Niño-driven disasters that still plague the region today. From Manu's fish to Raven's clamshell, these stories share a common thread. They transform trauma into teaching. Whether explaining geological events or conveying moral lessons, they remind us that floods aren't just endings, they're also beginnings. And perhaps that's why these ancient voices still speak to us across millennia, not as fairy tales, but as maps to navigate the rising tides of our own uncertain future. In the dense jungles and towering pyramids of Mesoamerica, flood myths take on a uniquely vivid and symbolic form. The Aztecs told of a world before ours, known as the Fourth Sun, which ended in a catastrophic deluge called Atl-Kahulua, water that destroys. According to their legends, only 2 humans survived, Coxcoxtli and his wife, who floated in a hollowed-out cypress tree until the waters receded. But here's where the story diverges from old world tales. The Aztecs believed this flood wasn't just punishment, but part of a cosmic cycle. Their mythology described 5 successive worlds, each destroyed by different forces: jaguars, wind, fire, and finally water, before the current era began. This cyclical view of catastrophe reflects their deep connection to nature's rhythms, where destruction always paved the way for renewal. The Mayan Popol Vuh offers an even more intricate vision of watery chaos. Before humans existed, the gods grew displeased with their first wooden creations and sent a great flood to wipe them out. Resin poured from the sky, crushing houses. Animals turned on their masters, and the few survivors became the monkeys swinging through today's jungles, a poetic explanation for primate similarities to humans. Unlike the biblical or Mesopotamian floods, this wasn't about moral judgment but creative trial and error. The Mayan gods weren't angry, they were perfectionists, refining their designs until they molded humans from sacred maize. What's startling is how geological evidence seems to echo these myths. Along Mexico's Gulf Coast, sediment studies reveal massive flooding around 3,200 years ago, possibly from a tsunami triggered by volcanic activity. The same era saw the collapse of the Olmec civilization, whose colossal head sculptures now stare silently from flooded ruins. Near Veracruz, archaeologists found layers of volcanic ash mixed with marine deposits, hinting at a disaster where fire and water collaborated. Could these events have inspired the Aztec and Mayan stories? The timing aligns with cultural memory spans, and the imagery fits. The Popol Vuh describes water boiling as it rose, a detail that takes on new meaning if survivors witnessed pyroclastic flows meeting the sea. Themes of rebirth set Mesoamerican myths apart. While Noah and Utnapishtim save existing life, Coxcoxtli and the maize-born humans represent fresh starts. This distinction may reflect environmental realities. Tropical ecosystems rebound dramatically after floods, with new growth quickly swallowing the old. It's a worldview where endings aren't tragedies but transitions, where even the destructive power of water carries the promise of fertility. Modern descendants still honor this duality during ceremonies like Mexico's Atlcahualo festival, where offerings are made to both request rain and prevent flooding, a delicate balance between needing and fearing water's power. These stories aren't just ancient history. When Hurricane Stan devastated Guatemala in 2005, Maya priests pointed to the Popol Vuh, interpreting the disaster as another cycle of cleansing. Meanwhile, scientists studying climate change note how rising sea levels threaten coastal Yucatan communities, mirroring the very floods their ancestors described. In this light, the legends feel less like myths and more like ancestral memos, reminders that water gives life but can also take it away, and that survival depends on respecting that balance. Whether carved on temple walls or whispered in village rituals, these narratives endure because they hold truths deeper than fact. That resilience isn't just about weathering the storm, but learning to dance in the rain that follows. The Greek flood myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha offers a striking twist on the familiar Deluge narrative, one where rebirth comes not from an ark's cargo, but from the very stones of the earth. According to the legend, Zeus, disgusted by humanity's corruption, unleashed a flood so vast that only the mountaintops remained above water. The virtuous Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha survived by floating in a chest for 9 days before landing on Mount Parnassus. When the waters receded, an oracle told them to repopulate the world by throwing the bones of their mother behind them. Interpreting this cryptic command as a reference to Gaia, the earth goddess, they tossed stones over their shoulders which miraculously transformed into humans, with Deucalion's throws becoming men and Pyrrha's becoming women. What makes this myth especially compelling is its potential connection to real cataclysms in the Aegean world. Geologists have uncovered evidence of massive tsunamis battering the eastern Mediterranean around 3,600 years ago, likely triggered by the volcanic eruption of Thera, modern-day Santorini. This explosion, one of the largest in human history, sent shockwaves across the region, with tidal waves estimated to have reached heights of 40 feet crashing into Crete and coastal Anatolia. The Minoan civilization, with its advanced palaces and vibrant art, collapsed shortly afterward, leaving behind ash-covered ruins and eerie silence. Could the Deucalion story preserve ancestral memories of this disaster? The timeline fits Greek oral traditions often stretched back centuries before being written down, and the motif of stones transforming into people might symbolize communities rebuilding from literal rubble. Then there's Plato's Atlantis, described in his dialogues as a mighty island kingdom that sank beneath the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. While often dismissed as pure fiction, scholars note uncanny parallels between Atlantis's demise and the Thera eruption. Plato's account mentions concentric rings of water and land, a feature matching Santorini's caldera before the blast. The Egyptian priests who supposedly told Solon the Atlantis story claimed it occurred 9,000 years earlier, but this could be a translation error. Swapping hundreds for thousands would place the event squarely in Thera's era. Even the name Atlantis may derive from Atlas, the titan associated with the Western Ocean, where Thera's ruins now lie. But here's where the Deucalion myth diverges from other flood narratives. Unlike Noah or Utnapishtim, who preserve existing life, Deucalion and Pir essentially recreate humanity from scratch, a theme echoing Greek ideas about cyclical time and regeneration. The stones they throw aren't just props, they're symbols of resilience, suggesting that even in devastation, the earth itself holds the seeds of renewal. This poetic imagery might reflect how disaster survivors actually rebuilt, not with preserved blueprints, but with raw materials at hand, forging new societies from the fragments of the old. So were these myths cautionary tales, geological records, or both? Perhaps they're proof that the ancients understood something we're only now rediscovering, that civilizations rise and fall, but the stories we tell about those collapses endure. Whether inspired by Thera's fury or older disasters lost to time, the Deucalion legend reminds us that after the floodwaters recede and the ash settles, what matters isn't just survival, but what we choose to rebuild with the stones left behind. Across the vast expanse of ancient China, where the Yellow River carved its serpentine path through fertile plains, another flood myth rises, one where humanity doesn't just survive the waters but conquers them. The story of Emperor Yu the Great isn't about divine wrath or miraculous arcs, but about relentless labor, ingenuity, and the triumph of human will over nature's chaos. According to legend, China's heartland was once a waterlogged wasteland, with floods so relentless they swallowed crops, villages, and entire generations. But where other cultures saw punishment from the gods, the Chinese saw a problem to be solved, and Yu, with his bare hands and unshakable determination, became their unlikely hero. What sets Yu apart from figures like Noah or Utnapishtim is his method. There's no heavenly warning or last-minute boat building here. Instead, Yu spends 13 backbreaking years dredging rivers, diverting floodwaters, and carving canals, so dedicated he passes his own home 3 times without stopping to greet his family. His tools, a bronze shovel and an intimate knowledge of the land's contours. His reward, not just survival, but the founding of China's first dynasty, the Xia. This isn't a story of escape. It's a blueprint for civilization itself, where water management becomes the bedrock of empire. Geology lends startling credence to this myth. Sediment cores from the Yellow River Basin reveal layers of catastrophic flooding around 4,000 years ago, coinciding with the supposed era of Yu. Known as China's Sorrow, the Yellow River has shifted its course over 26 times in recorded history, drowning millions. But archaeologists have also uncovered something remarkable: ancient networks of dikes and irrigation channels dating back to the very period Yu is said to have ruled. These aren't the remains of a single heroic effort, but evidence of generations laboring to tame the waters, suggesting Yu may represent the collective struggle of countless unnamed engineers. The moral of Yu's story diverges sharply from other flood myths. While Mesopotamian and biblical narratives emphasize obedience to divine will, Yu's tale celebrates human agency. The gods don't rescue China, the Chinese rescue themselves. This distinction may reflect the realities of life along the Yellow River, where floods weren't rare catastrophes but constant threats requiring communal solutions. Unlike the sudden deluges of Mesopotamia, China's floods were slow, seasonal, and crucially predictable enough to inspire organized resistance. Yu's legend encodes this practical wisdom. Civilization isn't a gift from the heavens, but something forged through sweat and strategy. Yet there's a fascinating spiritual layer too. Yu's success is attributed to his virtue, not piety, but a Confucian ideal of self-sacrifice for the greater good. Where other flood heroes are chosen for their righteousness, Yu earns his mandate through service, his muddy shins and calloused hands becoming symbols of legitimate rule. Even the mythical elements reflect this pragmatism. Yu is said to have received a sacred chart from a turtle, not as a divine reward but as a tool, a primordial map of China's waterways. This blending of myth and manual labor makes his story uniquely Chinese, a narrative where the sacred and the practical flow together like the very rivers Yu mastered. When we place Yu alongside Noah or Manu, the contrast is illuminating. In a world of floods sent by capricious gods, China's myth stands as a testament to another ancient truth, that some disasters aren't acts of vengeance but challenges to be met, and that humanity's greatest arc might not be a wooden vessel, but the determination to reshape the world itself. Now let's journey to the ancient landscapes of Australia, where Aboriginal flood stories carry memories so deep they ripple across thousands of generations. Unlike the grand cosmic floods of other traditions, these narratives often focus on specific coastlines, valleys, and islands, places where rising waters didn't just reshape the land but rewrote entire ways of life. Take the Gunditjmara people of Victoria, who tell of Port Phillip Bay once being dry land, where their ancestors hunted kangaroos until the ocean rushed in, forcing them to higher ground. Or the Ungarangeri legend of the Murray River's creation, where a great ancestor's blood mingled with floodwaters, carving the river's path. These aren't just myths, they're oral maps preserving precise details of landscapes transformed by rising seas. What's astonishing is how accurately these stories align with geological records. When the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, melting glaciers caused global sea levels to rise by over 120 meters, a process that drowned entire coastlines, including the vast Sahul Shelf connecting Australia to New Guinea. Core samples from Australia's northern shores reveal submerged freshwater lakes and river systems, now lying dozens of meters underwater. Yet Aboriginal oral traditions describe these vanished landscapes with eerie precision. In the Kimberley region, elders speak of a time when the islands of Buccaneer Archipelago were hills on a sprawling plain, a detail corroborated by sonar surveys showing drowned river valleys beneath the sea. The ethical weight of these stories can't be overstated. For decades, Western science dismissed indigenous knowledge as mere folklore, only to rediscover its accuracy through modern tools. The Luritja people's accounts of meteorite impacts, for example, led astronomers to the Henbury craters in the 1930s. Similarly, Yolngu stories about saltwater crocodiles in areas now far inland match fossil records showing how rising seas pushed crocs upstream. This isn't coincidence, it's the result of meticulous oral traditions designed to encode vital survival knowledge across millennia. When a Tiwi Islander describes how their ancestors watched the Apsley Strait flood, separating Melville Island from the mainland, they're not just telling a tale, they're delivering a first-hand account of events older than the pyramids of Giza. Respecting this knowledge means recognizing its sophistication. Aboriginal cultures developed complex systems to preserve environmental memory, songlines that map terrain, dances that reenact geological events, even kinship rules tied to specific landforms. The Wardaman people of the Northern Territory still sing about a time when the Victoria River was a chain of waterholes, a description matching paleohydrology models of the region during the last glacial maximum. Such continuity challenges the notion that oral histories can't endure for tens of thousands of years. It also raises profound questions. How many other ancient truths are etched into the stories of First Nations worldwide, waiting to be heard not as myths but as living records? The lesson here transcends archaeology. These narratives remind us that indigenous knowledge isn't a relic of the past but a vital lens for understanding our planet's history and its future. As climate change accelerates sea level rise, the very floods described in these ancient stories are returning. Torres Strait Islanders already report saltwater encroaching on freshwater wells, mirroring warnings in their oral traditions. In this light, Aboriginal flood myths aren't just about what was lost. They're guideposts for resilience, proving that the oldest stories sometimes hold the newest wisdom. And perhaps that's their greatest power, not just to tell us where the waters have been, but where they might flow next. Polynesian flood myths carry the salt and spray of the open ocean within their verses, reflecting a culture shaped by vast waters and the ever-present threat of their rage. Among the most poignant is the Hawaiian legend of No, who survived a great deluge by building an ark and floating to the summit of Mauna Kea, only to mistakenly offer sacrifices to the moon until the god Cain corrected him. At first glance, this echoes familiar flood motifs, but the details reveal something distinctly Pacific. Noah's Ark isn't a sealed wooden box but a canoe-like vessel called a wa, and his salvation comes not from repopulating the earth, but from relearning proper reverence for the forces of nature. This subtle shift hints at a deeper truth. For island peoples, floods weren't abstract punishments but intimate dangers, as personal as a rogue wave capsizing a fishing canoe. The broader Polynesian tradition teems with these watery narratives. In Tahiti, the god Ru raised the heavens to drain the floodwaters, while Maori legends tell of Tohaki summoning a deluge to cleanse the earth. But what's striking is how these stories intertwine with celestial navigation and wayfinding. The Kumulipo, a Hawaiian creation chant, describes the flood as a time when the islands were lifted up, then swallowed by the sea, a possible metaphor for tsunamis or rapid sea level rise. Oral histories from the Marshall Islands speak of entire atolls vanishing overnight, with survivors paddling for days to find new homes. These aren't just myths, they're survival manuals, encoding generations of observational science about wave patterns, storm seasons, and the fragile dance between land and ocean. Modern geology lends startling support to these traditions. Coral core samples from Polynesia show evidence of rapid drowning events around 3,000 years ago, when rising seas likely submerged low-lying islands. Sediment layers in Samoa and Tonga contain tsunami deposits dating back centuries, matching local stories of ocean warriors invading the shore. Even NOAA's landing on Mauna Kea aligns with scientific models. During the last ice age, Hawaii's volcanoes were nearly 2,000 feet taller relative to sea level, their slopes serving as natural refuges for coastal communities fleeing encroaching waters. The deeper we dig, the more these legends resemble poetic translations of real environmental trauma, not global floods, but localized disasters that reshaped Pacific geography and collective memory. What sets Polynesian narratives apart is their inseparable link to voyaging. Unlike stationary cultures that rebuilt on flooded lands, Polynesians responded to cataclysm with movement. Their flood myths often culminate in epic journeys like the legendary Hawaiialoa, who sailed through a tempest to find new islands after his homeland sank. This reflects a cultural ethos where survival meant adaptability, where every wave carried both threat and opportunity. The same star compass techniques that guided Polynesians across thousands of miles of open ocean may have also helped them navigate post-flood migrations, turning catastrophe into colonization. Today, scientists are merging traditional knowledge with cutting-edge tools to verify these oral histories. Satellite bathymetry reveals submerged terraces that match descriptions of lost islands in chants. Linguists trace shared flood vocabulary across Polynesian dialects to pinpoint when these events entered the cultural record. Archaeologists wade into coastal caves, finding tools and hearths beneath layers of tsunami sand, physical proof supporting stories once dismissed as fantasy. This collaboration between indigenous wisdom and Western science offers a blueprint for understanding not just the past, but our climate-challenged future. When Polynesian elders speak of the sea as both destroyer and life-giver, they're not spinning tales, they're offering hard-won lessons about resilience, etched not in stone, but in the rhythm of tides and the whisper of ancestral voices across the waves. The Black Sea Deluge isn't the only geological event that may have seeded ancient flood myths. Venture southeast to the Persian Gulf, where around 8,000 years ago, rising post-Ice Age seas transformed this region from a fertile river valley into the salty expanse we know today. Satellite imaging reveals ghostly river channels snaking beneath the Gulf's waters, remnants of the Gulf Oasis, a lush habitat that early humans called home. Core samples pulled from the seafloor contain layers of freshwater mollusk shells abruptly capped by marine deposits, telling a story of sudden inundation. For the people living along the banks of the ancient Tigris and Euphrates, this wasn't just a change in scenery, it was the disappearance of their entire world beneath the waves. Could this be the submerged reality behind Sumerian flood legends like Gilgamesh, where the gods shook the earth like a cup and drowned the land, now swing westward to the Mediterranean, where an even more dramatic flood reshaped continents? 5.3 million years ago, the Atlantic Ocean burst through the Strait of Gibraltar in what geologists call the Zanclean Flood, a cataclysmic event that refilled the dried-up Mediterranean basin in as little as 2 years. While too ancient to have entered human memory directly, its geological scars hint at the scale of flooding possible. The strait's underwater cliffs show erosion patterns suggesting waterfall flows 1,000 times mightier than Victoria Falls. But here's the fascinating part. Smaller, more recent repetitions of this process may have occurred during periods of lowered sea levels, leaving an imprint on coastal cultures. Phoenician traders spoke of a time when the Mediterranean boiled like a cauldron. Could this be folk memory of localized refilling events? Modern technology lets us map these vanished worlds with astonishing precision. NASA's satellite altimetry has traced submerged river systems like the Nile's lost tributaries, while sonar scans off India's coast reveal what may be the drowned city of Dwarka from Hindu legend. Sediment cores act as time capsules. In the Gulf of Cambay, layers containing human artifacts and burned wood lie beneath marine sediments, suggesting settlements overwhelmed by rising waters around 9,000 years ago. Even ice cores join the detective work. Greenland's layers show spikes in freshwater runoff around the same periods these floods occurred, linking local disasters to global climate shifts. The sheer variety of these events raises a provocative question. Could different cultures have been remembering entirely separate floods? The Persian Gulf inundation matches Mesopotamian timelines, while the Black Sea event aligns with Balkan and Anatolian legends. Australia's rising seas mirror Aboriginal oral histories, and Pacific tsunamis resonate with Polynesian chants. Rather than searching for a single Noah's flood, we might be looking at a tapestry of regional catastrophes, each woven into local mythology. After all, water is the great leveler, whether it's a river overflowing its banks or an ocean reclaiming the land. The human experience of displacement and loss transcends geography. What unites these stories isn't necessarily a shared event, but a shared understanding that the waters remember what the land forgets, and sometimes the oldest truths surface in the unlikeliest of ways. 12,800 years ago, something catastrophic shook our planet. Just as the last ice age was loosening its grip, Earth suddenly plunged back into a deep freeze, a brutal cold snap known as the Younger Dryas. Temperatures plummeted, glaciers resurged, and megafauna like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats vanished almost overnight. But what caused this abrupt reversal? One daring theory suggests an extraterrestrial culprit, a shattered comet streaking across the sky. its fragments slamming into the ice sheets of North America and Europe. The resulting fires, floods, and dust clouds would have darkened the skies for generations, a disaster so profound it might have etched itself into humanity's oldest stories as the Great Flood. The evidence for this cosmic catastrophe comes from scattered but startling clues. In sediment layers dating to the Younger Dryas boundary, scientists have found exotic materials like nanodiamonds, microscopic structures that typically form under extreme heat and pressure, like those from an impact. There are also spikes in platinum and iridium, metals rare on Earth but abundant in asteroids and comets. Most intriguing are the black mats, organic rich soil layers found across 4 continents, packed with charcoal and melted glass particles, hinting at continent-spanning wildfires. Then there's the geological footprint of sudden, massive flooding. Scars from outbursts when collapsing ice dams released volumes of water greater than all the world's rivers combined. Could these apocalyptic events explain why flood myths share such uncanny similarities across isolated cultures? Proponents of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis point to a striking pattern. Many indigenous traditions describe not just water, but fire from the sky preceding the deluge. The Ojibwe people of North America speak of a sky serpent, whose fiery body scorched the earth before the rains came. Aboriginal Australians recount ancestral beings fleeing burning landscapes as seas rose. Even Plato's Atlantis myth mentions portents in the heavens before the island sank. These parallels raise a tantalizing possibility that humanity's flood stories aren't just metaphors, but fragmented memories of a global trauma. Yet the theory remains fiercely debated. Skeptics argue the impact evidence is inconclusive, that nanodiamonds could form from wildfires, and platinum spikes might trace to volcanic eruptions. Some geologists insist the megafauna extinctions and climate shifts were gradual, driven by natural feedback loops rather than a single cataclysm. Even the timing is contested. While the Younger Dryas fit some flood myths, others, like the Aboriginal stories, clearly reference much older sea level rises. The truth may lie somewhere in between, a mosaic of real disasters, some cosmic, some terrestrial, all compressed into cultural memory as a singular Great Flood. What's undeniable is how these scientific debates breathe new life into ancient narratives. When the Clovis people of North America carved mammoth bones with strange, zigzagging patterns around 12,800 years ago, were they recording a comet's path? When Göbekli Tepe's mysterious pillars in Turkey were erected just centuries after the Younger Dryas began, did their vulture carvings symbolize a sky filled with carrion birds after the devastation? We may never have definitive answers, but the questions themselves redefine how we see these enduring legends, not as fairy tales, but as ancestral eyewitness accounts etched in stone and story. And perhaps that's the real lesson. When humanity faces the unimaginable, we don't just survive it, we turn it into myth, ensuring that even the deepest floods never wash away the memory of what came before. Beneath the waves off the coast of Gujarat, India, lies a mystery that could rewrite history. The ancient city of Dwarka, long considered mere legend from Hindu texts, now emerges from the depths as a tangible link between myth and reality. According to the Mahabharata, Dwarka was a magnificent coastal kingdom built by the god Krishna, its towering gates and golden spires eventually swallowed by the sea as the deity departed Earth. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as poetic fiction until marine archaeologists discovered massive stone structures, pottery shards, and even anchors scattered across the seafloor. Carbon dating places these ruins around 3,500 years old, coinciding with the legendary city's described downfall. The layout matches ancient descriptions eerily well, a grid of streets radiating from a central point, just as the texts claimed. Across the Mediterranean, another sunken city whispers of forgotten disasters. Pavloptri, nestled off Greece's Peloponnese coast, is the world's oldest submerged urban settlement, dating back over 5,000 years. Unlike Dwarka's dramatic sinking, Pavloptri's demise was likely gradual, a casualty of rising sea levels as glaciers melted. Its perfectly preserved streets, courtyards, and even tombs offer a snapshot of daily life frozen in time. Archaeologists found ceramic jars still stacked as if awaiting shipment, hinting at a bustling trade hub abruptly abandoned. What makes Pavloptri extraordinary isn't just its age, but its normalcy. This wasn't a mythical metropolis, but an ordinary Bronze Age town, suggesting countless similar settlements may have vanished beneath the waves without leaving legends behind. These underwater discoveries force us to reconsider how ancient cultures processed trauma. Dwarka's dramatic submergence became a divine allegory, while Pavloptri's quieter disappearance faded from memory entirely. The difference highlights how societies transform catastrophe into narrative. Some events are mythologized, others forgotten. Marine geologists note that nearly all coastal civilizations experienced significant flooding between 15,000 and 5,000 years ago, as seas rose nearly 400 feet post-Ice Age. Yet only a fraction of these events entered folklore. The ones that did, like Dwarka or Atlantis, often involved cultural zeniths, making their loss more poignant. A fishing village might vanish without a trace, but a golden city that becomes legend. Technology now lets us interrogate these stories in unprecedented ways. Side-scan sonar reveals drowned river valleys off Australia's coast, matching Aboriginal oral histories. LiDAR mapping uncovers submerged causeways in the North Sea's Deucalion, where mammoth hunters once roamed dry plains. In the Bahamas, underwater megaliths near Bimini spark debates about lost megalithic cultures, though some argue these roads are natural beach-rock formations. The challenge lies in distinguishing human handiwork from nature's artistry. When divers found circular stone structures in Japan's Yonaguni Monument, debates raged. Were these terraces artificial, as some archaeologists claim, or merely oddly eroded sandstone? Either way, their presence proves how rising waters conceal as much as they destroy. Perhaps most intriguing are the gaps in the record. For every Dwarka, there are dozens of unnamed ruins, like the sunken walls found near Cuba's coast at depths suggesting they predate known civilizations in the Americas. Or the Baltic Sea's Stonehenge, a line of boulders that may mark an ancient hunting ground now 60 feet underwater. These silent witnesses hint at a shadow history of humanity, one where coastal cultures flourished and fell without leaving written accounts. Their stories survive only in oblique references. Plato's tale of Athens repelling Atlantis might encode memories of battling sea-faring invaders from drowned lands. Even the Bible's islands fleeing in Revelation could describe volcanic islands collapsing under rising seas, as happened with Santorini's eruption. As climate change accelerates modern sea level rise, these ancient lessons grow urgent. Venice's flooding and Miami's king tides echo the slow-motion disasters that doomed Pavloptri. The difference is that we can read the warnings not just in scientific models, but in the very myths our ancestors left us. When the Mahabharata describes Dwarka's submersion, it notes how the sea first grew turbulent, then swallowed the city whole. Today, satellite altimetry shows ocean currents intensifying along India's coast, mirroring that ancient description. The past isn't just prologue, it's a mirror, reflecting back the consequences of ignoring nature's power. And perhaps that's why these sunken cities captivate us. They're not just archaeological puzzles, but submerged memories, reminding us that every coastline is a frontier, and every frontier has its ghosts. Language itself may hold the key to unraveling the global tapestry of flood myths. When linguists compare words for flood across distant cultures, startling patterns emerge. In the Proto-Indo-European tongue spoken over 5,000 years ago, the root plu meant to flow or to flood, a sound that echoes through time in the Latin pluvia for rain, the Greek plino meaning I wash, and even the Old English flowen, which gives us our modern flood. This linguistic thread weaves through continents, suggesting our ancestors carried flood memories in their very speech as they migrated across the globe. The pioneering work of linguists like Merit Rulon reveals even deeper connections. By analyzing hundreds of languages, researchers have reconstructed fragments of proto-world, humanity's original mother tongue spoken tens of thousands of years ago. Among the surviving words they've identified is muku, meaning water or to drown, a root preserved in the Mayan muk, the Quechua muku, and the Proto-Austronesian muk used across Pacific islands. Even more telling are shared story structures. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, flood narratives consistently follow a three-part rhythm: the warning, the deluge, and the rebirth. This narrative architecture appears too similar to be coincidence, hinting at an ancient prototype story passed down through generations. Consider the curious case of the word ark. In the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh, the survival vessel is called an ilipu, while Noah's is the Hebrew teba. But trace these terms back, and they converge on the concept of container or box in their respective proto-languages. This parallel framing, a sealed receptacle preserving life, suggests different cultures adapted the same core concept to their environments, whether it was Mesopotamian river barges or seafaring Polynesian canoes. The consistency isn't in the words themselves, but in the underlying idea. When disaster strikes, humanity's salvation floats. Linguistic paleontology takes us even further. The Aboriginal word Gyorangach describes both a mythical water serpent and ancient flood channels in southeastern Australia, a direct link between language, landscape, and legend. Similarly, the Algonquian peoples of North America share cognate words for great wave that appear in flood stories from the Micmac to the Cheyenne, despite these groups separating thousands of years ago. These aren't just vocabulary matches, they're cultural time capsules, preserving environmental memories that predate written history. The most compelling evidence comes from grammatical structures. Flood myths in unrelated language families, from the Uralic speakers of Siberia to the Bantu peoples of Africa, frequently use the same unusual verb forms when describing the deluge. These narrative past tenses, which linguists call mythic markers, serve as a kind of storytelling signature, signaling that what follows isn't ordinary history but sacred tradition. The widespread use of these specialized grammatical tools points to a shared oral storytelling technique that may have originated before humans first left Africa. Of course, linguistic clues come with caveats. Words can be borrowed through trade, and stories can spread independently. But when multiple lines of evidence converge, shared vocabulary, parallel narrative structures, and specialized grammar, it becomes harder to dismiss these connections as mere chance. Like sediment layers building up over millennia, language preserves strata of human experience, with the oldest floods leaving their mark in our very speech. The next time you say, "It's raining cats and dogs," you might be tapping into a memory far older than you realize, one that began when the first storytellers huddled in caves, trying to explain why the waters rose. Flood myths persist not just as historical curiosities, but as deep psychological anchors in the human experience. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious offers one compelling lens. the idea that certain symbols, like the Deluge, emerge across cultures because they're hardwired into our psyche as archetypes. The flood isn't merely a disaster in these stories. It's a primal metaphor for chaos, the uncontrollable forces that periodically upend our lives. Jung saw water as the ultimate symbol of the unconscious itself, vast, mysterious, and capable of both nurturing life and obliterating it in an instant. This duality might explain why flood legends so often oscillate between terror and redemption, portraying the waters as both destroyer and womb of rebirth. From a trauma perspective, these myths could represent humanity's earliest attempts to process catastrophic events. Psychologists studying post-disaster communities note how survivors often encode their experiences in ritual and narrative, creating shared stories that help them cope. The repetitive nature of flood myths, their insistence on cycles of destruction and renewal, mirrors the way trauma survivors replay events to make sense of them. The Babylonian flood tablet describing the sea rising like a wall, or the Maori legend of Tohaki summoning waves to cleanse the earth aren't just descriptions. They're psychological transcripts, attempts to master the uncontrollable through storytelling. Cognitive scientists point to another factor: floods make for exceptionally sticky memories. Unlike earthquakes or droughts, rising water leaves unambiguous physical traces: sediment layers, drowned landscapes, saltwater intrusions into freshwater sources. These tangible markers create what researchers call flashbulb memories, events so vivid they're passed down with unusual accuracy. The Aboriginal story of the Gulf of Carpenteria's flooding, for instance, precisely matches geological data from 8,000 years ago. When every generation can point to submerged trees or shell middens underwater, the story gains staying power, evolving from anecdote to mythos. Symbolically, floods also serve as the ultimate societal reset button, a theme that resonates across moral and spiritual traditions. In Judeo-Christian theology, the flood purges corruption. In Hindu cosmology, it's part of the eternal cycle of creation and dissolution. This narrative trope taps into a profound human longing, the chance to start over, to wash away mistakes and rebuild from scratch. Modern dystopian stories, from climate fiction to zombie apocalypses, still lean heavily on flood imagery because it viscerally conveys that yearning for blank slates. The ark itself becomes a potent symbol of hope, a fragile vessel carrying the seeds of tomorrow through the storm. Yet perhaps the most enduring quality of flood myths is their adaptability. Unlike fixed historical accounts, these stories mold themselves to fit new contexts. The same basic plot, warning, catastrophe, survival, can serve as a cautionary tale about environmental hubris, a parable about divine justice, or even a metaphor for personal transformation. When Freudian analysts reinterpret the flood as a symbolic birth narrative, or when climate activists use Noah's story to call for environmental stewardship, they're continuing a tradition as old as storytelling itself, pouring new wine into ancient wineskins. The waters keep rising in our myths because they mirror the crises of every generation, whether it's rising seas or the tumultuous currents of human existence. And that may be their greatest power, not to tell us where we've been, but to help us navigate where we're going. Long before writing carved history into stone or clay, human memory was the living archive of our past, and nowhere is this more striking than in the oral traditions that preserved flood memories across generations. Take the Klamath people of the Pacific Northwest, whose legend describes a titanic battle between the sky god Skell and the underworld spirit Lau, ending with the collapse of Mount Mazama and the creation of Crater Lake. For centuries, this story was dismissed as symbolic mythology, until geologists confirmed that the 6-mile-wide caldera did indeed form from a volcanic eruption 7,700 years ago, matching the Klamath timeline with eerie precision. The details are astonishingly accurate. The legend speaks of fiery explosions darkening the sky, just as ash layers show, and describes the mountain's summit falling into itself, mirroring the actual geological process of caldera formation. This isn't just coincidence, it's proof that oral traditions could encode complex geological events with near-scientific fidelity. What makes these stories so resilient? Indigenous cultures worldwide developed sophisticated memory technologies to safeguard critical knowledge. Australian Aboriginal songlines weave landscape features into melodic mnemonics, ensuring navigation details survive for millennia. The griots of West Africa use rhythmic repetition and genealogical recitation to preserve historical accounts verbatim across centuries. In the Andes, Quechua knotted string kippers recorded data through intricate patterns of chords, a tactile database that functioned without writing. These systems weren't primitive, they were precision tools for information storage, honed by cultures where survival depended on accurately transmitting environmental knowledge. When the Klamath spoke of Crater Lake's formation or the Gunditjmara described Port Phillip Bay's flooding, they weren't just telling tales, they were maintaining generational backup files of catastrophic events. The implications are staggering. If oral traditions could preserve the memory of a volcanic eruption for over 7,000 years, what other truths might be hidden in myths we've dismissed as fiction? The Maori story of Te Tai Arahuta, describing a tidal wave so high it scraped the sky, aligns with geological evidence of massive tsunamis striking New Zealand's coast around the 15th century. The Chickasaw legend of a moon falling into the sea could record a meteor impact in the Gulf of Mexico, while the Norse myth of Ragnarok's flooding may echo North Atlantic tsunami events. Even small details like the Yupik people's warning never to build villages on certain lowlands often prove to be distilled wisdom from forgotten disasters. Critics argue that oral histories inevitably distort over time, but anthropological research reveals the opposite. In cultures where storytelling is sacred, deviations are actively policed. The Paiute elders who recounted the formation of Nevada's Pyramid Lake over 12,000 years ago maintained consistent details about water levels and fish species, details later verified by paleolimnology. Similarly, the Inuit tale of Sela, a vengeful spirit causing sudden sea surges, perfectly describes the behavior of subglacial floods from collapsing ice dams, events only recently understood by modern science. These aren't garbled whispers from the past, they're eyewitness accounts filtered through generations, refined by the urgency of survival. The real lesson here isn't just about floods, it's about redefining what counts as history. When Western scientists first recorded Aboriginal stories in the 19th century, they assumed these were simple folk tales. Now we're discovering they're often literal records, as factual as any ship's log or coroner's report, just written in the language of symbolism and landscape. As anthropologist Lynn Kelly demonstrates in her work on Indigenous knowledge systems, oral traditions frequently outperform written records for accuracy over long timescales, precisely because they're woven into song, ceremony, and daily practice. A Greek historian might misplace a decimal point when recording an earthquake's date, but a tsunami chant preserved through ritual dance endures unchanged because forgetting a step means breaking sacred tradition. This challenges us to listen differently to the world's surviving oral cultures. When the Tlingit people of Alaska speak of Glacier Bay's rapid advance 300 years ago, an event their ancestors witnessed and documented in clan crests, their account matches glacial moraine evidence exactly. When Amazonian tribes describe a time when the river flowed backward, sediment cores confirm ancient megafloods reversing the Amazon's current. These stories aren't just myths, they're humanity's oldest history books, written not in ink but in memory and landscape. And as climate change resurrects ancient flood patterns, these oral archives may hold urgent lessons about surviving the rising tides, if we're wise enough to hear them. The rising tides of today aren't just a modern crisis, they're the latest chapter in an ancient story written in water and human resilience. As glaciers melt and coastlines retreat, we're witnessing a phenomenon our ancestors knew intimately: the sea's relentless hunger for land. The difference now is scale. Where Neolithic villages faced localized flooding, today's megacities from Miami to Mumbai confront a planetary-scale reckoning. Yet buried in the sediment layers of history are blueprints for survival, stark reminders that humanity has weathered these storms before, often with remarkable ingenuity. Take the ancient Maya, whose cities in the Yucatan Peninsula were designed with elevated plazas and intricate drainage systems to channel seasonal floods. Or consider the stilt houses of Southeast Asia's Bronze Age cultures, built to ride the waves rather than resist them. These weren't just architectural quirks, they were hard-won adaptations to a world where waterlines shifted unpredictably. Modern climate science now confirms what oral traditions long hinted, that sea levels have been a moving target throughout human history. Core samples from Greenland's ice sheets reveal periods when oceans rose as fast as 5 centimeters per year, nearly triple today's rate, swallowing entire ecosystems in centuries. The difference is that our ancestors lacked satellites and climate models. They relied on generational memory encoded in stories like the Welsh legend of Cantre Gwaelod, a fertile kingdom now under Cardigan Bay, or the Japanese tale of the Jomon people's coastal settlements drowned by the Jomon transgression. These weren't just tragedies, they were survival lessons wrapped in narrative, teaching future generations where to build, when to retreat, and how to read the water's whispers. The parallels between then and now are impossible to ignore. Like the ancestral Puebloans who migrated from Colorado's flood-prone valleys to higher ground, Alaskan villages like Newtok are relocating inland as permafrost thaws. Where Bronze Age Cypriots built seawalls against storm surges, modern Rotterdam floats entire neighborhoods on buoyant platforms. Even traditional knowledge dismissed as folklore is proving prescient. Pacific Islanders' star-based navigation charts now guide scientists studying shifting ocean currents, while Inuit observations of thinning ice have rewritten Arctic climate models. The irony is poignant. Just as Western science validates these ancient adaptations, globalization erodes the very cultures that preserved them. But the past offers more than practical solutions. It provides existential perspective. When archaeologists unearthed Deucalion, the submerged land bridge between Britain and Europe, they found evidence of gradual adaptation followed by abrupt collapse. Early residents adjusted to rising waters by switching from deer hunting to fishing. But when a catastrophic tsunami struck around 6,100 years ago, their flexibility reached its limit. This same pattern echoes in today's climate hotspots, where incremental changes mask looming tipping points. The lesson isn't doom but urgency, a reminder that resilience requires both innovation and the wisdom to recognize when old ways must yield to new realities. Perhaps most haunting are the ghost forest stands of dead trees along coasts from Oregon to Bangladesh, their roots poisoned by saltwater intrusion. These spectral groves mirror the submerged cypress stumps off Alabama's coast, drowned by rising seas 4,000 years ago. Both are silent witnesses to nature's inexorable advance, but also to life's stubborn persistence. In the same strata where those ancient trees fell, archaeologists find oyster middens, proof that coastal cultures pivoted from farming to shellfish harvesting. It's a testament to humanity's ability to reinvent itself when the old world washes away. The challenge now is to listen across time, When Venice invests in mobile floodgates or Bangkok considers amphibious architecture, they're channeling the same adaptive spirit that once raised Mesopotamian ziggurats above floodplains. But technology alone isn't enough. The true inheritance from our flood-surviving ancestors isn't just their tools, it's their mindset. They understood that survival meant cooperating with water's rhythms, not conquering them. As the oceans rise again, their stories whisper a simple truth: the flood always comes. The question is whether we'll be remembered as the generation that drowned in denial or the ones who learned to swim. Flood myths didn't just survive through oral tradition, they became the bedrock of entire belief systems, shaping how cultures understood divinity, morality, and humanity's place in the cosmos. In the Abrahamic traditions, the story of Noah's Ark isn't merely a tale of survival. It's a theological pivot point, a divine reset where obedience to God's covenant ensures redemption. The flood here serves as both punishment and promise, a cleansing of corruption, followed by the rainbow's pledge that such destruction would never recur. This linear narrative, sin, judgment, and renewal, reflects a worldview where history moves toward a divine purpose, a stark contrast to the cyclical floods of Hindu cosmology. In the Matsya Purana, the deluge isn't an endpoint but a phase in the eternal rhythm of creation and dissolution. Lord Vishnu's fish avatar doesn't just save Manu, it preserves the seeds of existence itself, reinforcing the idea that destruction is never final, merely a prelude to rebirth. The theological fingerprints of these stories reveal deeper cultural priorities. For the ancient Mesopotamians, the flood in Gilgamesh reflects capricious gods who drown humanity on a whim, only to regret it later, a narrative that underscores their view of deities as unpredictable forces to be appeased, not moral guides. Compare this to the biblical flood, where the waters are a deliberate act of justice and Noah's righteousness is rewarded. The difference isn't just theological, it's existential. One culture saw the divine as arbitrary, the other as purposeful. Even the aftermath diverges. Utnapishtim is granted immortality as a consolation prize, while Noah is tasked with repopulating the earth under a new covenant, a mission infused with moral responsibility. Eastern traditions offer yet another lens. In Chinese mythology, Emperor Yu's flood isn't sent by angry gods but arises from nature's imbalance. His triumph over the waters through engineering and perseverance reflects Confucian ideals of virtue through service, where harmony with the natural world is achieved through human effort, not divine intervention. Meanwhile, in Mesoamerica, the Aztec myth of the fourth sun positions the flood as one in a series of cosmic do-overs, each destruction paving the way for a more refined creation. Here, the deluge isn't about morality but cosmic housekeeping, a necessary purge to maintain universal order. These narratives also shaped ritual and practice. In Judaism, the ark's dimensions and construction details in Genesis became blueprints for later temple designs, symbolizing sacred spaces as vessels of salvation. Hindu communities still reenact Manu's story during festivals like Pralaya, where effigies of the fish avatar are paraded to remind devotees of resilience. And in indigenous Andean traditions, annual offerings to Pachamama, Earth Mother, include rituals to prevent flooding, blending myth with environmental stewardship. The flood wasn't just a story, it was a lived framework for navigating uncertainty. The most profound takeaway lies in what these myths share: water as the great equalizer. Whether framed as judgment, renewal, or cosmic maintenance, floods strip away pretenses, reducing humanity to its most vulnerable, and in doing so, reveal what each culture cherished most. For the Hebrews, it was covenant; for the Hindus, continuity; for the Aztecs, cyclical perfection. Today, as climate change amplifies flooding worldwide, these ancient stories gain new urgency. They remind us that how we narrate disaster shapes how we survive it, not just physically but spiritually. The waters keep rising, but so does the human need to find meaning in the tide. Satellite technology is peeling back the jungle canopy and desert sands to reveal secrets our ancestors whispered about for millennia. LiDAR, light detection and ranging, works like an X-ray for landscapes, using laser pulses to map terrain beneath dense vegetation. When researchers aimed this tool at the Amazon basin, they didn't just find a few scattered ruins. They uncovered an entire lost geography of interconnected cities, roads, and farmland stretching across Bolivia's Llanos de Mojos. These weren't small villages, but sophisticated urban centers with elevated causeways and intricate water management systems, clear adaptations to seasonal flooding. The kicker, sediment cores from the region show evidence of catastrophic inundations around 1500 years ago, coinciding with the abandonment of these settlements. Suddenly, indigenous stories about cities swallowed by the river take on startling new weight. The same technology has rewritten history in Southeast Asia. In Cambodia, LiDAR scans of Angkor Wat's hinterland revealed a sprawling metropolis larger than modern-day Los Angeles, complete with reservoirs and canals designed to control monsoon floods. But the scans also showed something darker: gigantic breach points in the city's hydraulic system. Archaeologists now believe that around the 14th century, a combination of extreme flooding and failed infrastructure triggered Angkor's collapse. This wasn't gradual decline, it was a civilization undone by water, its grand temples left to the jungle as survivors fled higher ground. The Khmer legend of the Naga King's Revenge, where serpentine deities flood the land in wrath, reads differently now, not as myth, but as cultural trauma fossilized in oral tradition. Even more astonishing are the submerged landscapes emerging from satellite bathymetry. Off Australia's northwestern coast, sonar has mapped vast freshwater basins, now 100 meters underwater, precisely the areas where Aboriginal stories place ancestral hunting grounds before the sea rose. In the North Sea, fishermen trawling Deucalion, a landmass that connected Britain to Europe 8,000 years ago, routinely haul up mammoth bones and Stone Age tools. Multibeam echo sounders have reconstructed this drowned world in stunning detail, showing river valleys that match Germanic flood myths about Ymir's blood drowning the giants. The science confirms what oral histories preserved. These weren't imagined catastrophes, but real events that reshaped human migration and settlement patterns. The real game changer is how these tools are decoding flood myths with forensic precision. In Turkey, ground-penetrating radar at the ancient Hittite capital of Hattusa detected silt layers consistent with a massive flood described in cuneiform tablets. In Mexico, thermal imaging of the Gulf Coast revealed submerged circular structures near Veracruz's possible counterparts to the Aztec legend of Aztlan, the island homeland supposedly lost to rising waters. Even the Bible's reference to the fountains of the Great Deep finds eerie resonance in sonar images of the Black Sea's underwater canyons, where pressurized water may have once erupted through the seafloor during the Great Deluge. What's revolutionary isn't just the discovery of lost cities, but the realization that flood myths often contain precise environmental data. The Maori story of Te Tai e Rehua describes a tsunami with such specific wave dynamics that oceanographers can model its probable origin point. Similarly, the Chickasaw tale of a moon falling into the sea includes details about boiling water and dead fish that align with impact crater evidence off the Yucatan coast. These narratives aren't allegories, they're eyewitness accounts dressed in cultural symbolism, waiting for science to provide the Rosetta Stone. As satellites peer deeper into Earth's hidden layers, they're revealing a pattern. Civilizations don't just rise and fall, they often drown. From the sunken obsidian workshops of Greece's Franche, I cave to the drowned mangrove forests of the Persian Gulf. Each discovery reinforces how floods shaped human destiny. The next time you hear an ancient flood story, remember, it might not be fiction, but a distorted reflection in history's rearview mirror, now coming into sharp focus through the unblinking eye of modern technology. And as sea levels rise today, these long silent warnings suddenly speak with renewed urgency. The allure of discovering Noah's Ark perched on Mount Ararat or uncovering a single global flood that inspired every myth is undeniably tempting. It promises neat answers to messy questions. But when we venture into the realm of pseudoscience, where sensational claims outpace evidence, we risk muddying the waters of real discovery. Take the perennial Ark sightings that surface every few years, often backed by blurry satellite images or unverified wood fragments. Despite dramatic headlines, these discoveries consistently crumble under scrutiny. Radiocarbon dating reveals modern lumber. Geological surveys debunk unnatural shapes as rock formations, and expeditions return empty-handed. The same pattern repeats with hyper-diffusionist theories, which propose that a single advanced civilization, be it Atlantis or aliens, spread flood myths worldwide. These ideas often cherry-pick similarities while ignoring cultural context, like claiming the Mayan flood god Huracan must be linked to the Hindu Varuna simply because the names sound alike. What makes these theories persist isn't just wishful thinking, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how myths evolve. Flood narratives aren't carbon copies of one event but adaptive responses to diverse traumas. Consider the difference between a tsunami memory in Polynesia and a river flood legend in Mesopotamia. One reflects the sudden terror of ocean surges, the other the cyclical fury of silt-laden rivers. When theorists force these into a single framework, they erase the richness of local experience. Even the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, while compelling, doesn't explain Aboriginal flood stories tied to rising seas 12,000 years earlier. The truth is messier and more fascinating than any universal flood. Archaeologists face an uphill battle against misinformation. A viral documentary might showcase ancient ship-shaped formations in Turkey's Dorukpınar site, but geologists confirm these are synclinal ridges, natural folds in rock layers. Similarly, claims about out-of-place underwater structures often overlook simpler explanations. The so-called Bimini Road in the Bahamas, once touted as Atlantis's pavement, is now recognized as beach rock fracturing along natural joints. This doesn't diminish the wonder of real underwater ruins like Dwarka or Pavloptri, but it underscores the importance of rigor. Science isn't about dismissing mysteries, it's about testing them. When marine archaeologists find a sunken city, they don't leap to mythology, they analyze pottery styles, construction techniques, and sediment layers to piece together a timeline. The danger of pseudoscience isn't just bad history, it's the erosion of indigenous voices. When outsiders insist Aboriginal flood stories must derive from Mesopotamian tales, they ignore 60,000 years of oral tradition preserving local sea level rise. The Klamath people's account of Crater Lake's formation doesn't need an Atlantean intermediary to be valid. Their ancestors witnessed the eruption firsthand. Likewise, reducing the complexity of flood myths to ancient astronauts robs cultures of their agency, implying they couldn't have interpreted disasters without extraterrestrial help. This colonial lens distorts more than it reveals, yet there's a middle ground between skepticism and credulity. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, while controversial, demonstrates how fringe ideas can spur legitimate research. Initially dismissed, it's now fueled peer-reviewed studies on nanodiamonds and platinum spikes. The key distinction, testable evidence. Unlike arc hunters who declare victory with a single photo, scientists following this lead publish data for others to challenge. That's how knowledge advances, not through grand proclamations, but through incremental questions. Ultimately, the real magic of flood myths lies not in proving them true, but in understanding why they endure. They're not ancient newspapers reporting events verbatim. They're cultural survival tools, encoding everything from navigation warnings to moral codes. When we replace their nuance with simplistic pseudoscience, we don't solve mysteries, we silence them. The next time you hear a claim about a discovered ark or a lost super-civilization, ask not just could it be, but what does this explanation overlook? Because history, like water, rarely flows in straight lines, and the deepest truths often lie in the currents between certainty and wonder. Imagine a team of geologists poring over sediment cores, anthropologists dissecting oral traditions, and archaeologists mapping submerged ruins, all working in tandem to solve the same ancient puzzle. This isn't science fiction. It's the cutting edge of interdisciplinary research, where flood myths are no longer relegated to literature departments, but treated as vital clues in understanding Earth's turbulent past. The breakthrough comes when we stop asking whether these stories are true and start asking what truths they might preserve. Take the collaboration that pinpointed the Storegga slide tsunami 8,200 years ago. Scottish geologists studying seabed deposits off Norway uncovered evidence of a colossal underwater landslide that sent 20-meter waves crashing into coastal settlements. Meanwhile, anthropologists working with the Orkney Islands' oral traditions recognized eerie parallels in local legends about the sea rising like a wall and foam covering the sun. By cross-referencing these accounts with archaeological sites showing abrupt abandonment layers, the team reconstructed a disaster that reshaped Neolithic Europe, proving that myth and sediment can tell the same story in different languages. The synergy extends to the Pacific, where indigenous knowledge is rewriting oceanography. For generations, Marshall Islanders passed down intricate wave charts made from sticks and shells, mapping ocean swells and currents. Scientists initially dismissed these as primitive art until they realized the charts accurately predicted tidal patterns disrupted by ancient sea level rise. When researchers layered these navigational aids with sonar data, they identified submerged atolls and safe passages forgotten for millennia. Similarly, in Australia, the Gugu Badhun people's songlines describing rivers that flowed backward led hydrologists to discover evidence of prehistoric megafloods in Queensland's riverbeds. These aren't just lucky guesses, they're the result of cultures honing observational science over thousands of years and encoding it in narrative. Perhaps the most compelling case comes from the Arctic, where Inuit accounts of land that sank long puzzled outsiders. Modern bathymetric surveys now reveal vast continental shelves that were dry land during the last ice age, matching the descriptions in elders' stories. When geologists dated the submergence to 13,000 years ago, it confirmed these weren't metaphorical tales but ancestral eyewitness accounts preserved with astonishing precision. The same pattern emerges in the Amazon, where Munduruku stories about giant serpents reshaping the rivers guided researchers to fossilized remains of massive Pleistocene snakes, their coils preserved in sediments that also showed signs of catastrophic flooding. What makes these collaborations revolutionary isn't just their findings but their methodology. Scientists are learning to read myths as encoded data, identifying recurring motifs like boiling seas as possible descriptors of underwater volcanic activity or animals fleeing inland as behavioral clues preceding tsunamis. Linguists contribute by analyzing flood vocabulary across languages, tracing shared roots that might indicate common ancestral memories. Archaeologists then ground truth these insights by excavating sites where myth and geology intersect, like the Yucatan caves where Maya flood legends align with stalagmite records of ancient droughts and deluges. The implications ripple beyond academia. In New Zealand, Maori traditions about tidal waves swallowing villages informed tsunami risk maps now used for coastal planning. In the American Southwest, Hopi flood narratives led hydrologists to uncover ancient irrigation systems that could inspire modern water conservation. Even climate scientists are tapping into these time-tested narratives, recognizing that indigenous stories about ecological thresholds, like the Inuit warning that when the ice forgets its rhythm, the sea will remember, offer nuanced models for predicting climate tipping points. This interdisciplinary approach does more than decode the past, it reshapes our future. When a Tamil Nadu fisherman recounts his grandfather's tale of a city beneath the waves, and marine archaeologists later discover a sunken port matching his description, it's not just history being recovered, it's a bridge between ways of knowing. The next great flood story might not be etched in clay or sung around a fire, but in the collaborative language of sediment cores, sonar scans, and the enduring power of human memory. And that's the real revelation. Science and myth aren't opposites, but two currents in the same river, finally flowing together toward a deeper understanding of our planet and our own story. Respect for indigenous knowledge demands more than just recording flood stories. It requires recognizing these narratives as living, sacred traditions rather than academic curiosities. When Western researchers first encountered Aboriginal accounts of coastal flooding, many dismissed them as imaginative folklore. Now, with geological evidence confirming these oral histories date back over 7,000 years, the scientific community faces a reckoning. The Gunditjmara people's description of Port Phillip Bay's formation, passed down through hundreds of generations, matches sonar scans of submerged river valleys with uncanny precision. But here's the ethical tightrope. How do we validate these truths without reducing them to data points? Collaborative models are showing the way forward. In Canada's Heiltsuk Nation, elders worked with marine archaeologists to locate ancient settlements beneath Heiltsuk waters, not by imposing Western methodologies, but by pairing sonar technology with traditional navigation songs that encoded tidal patterns. The discovery of a 13,000-year-old village site wasn't claimed as a scientific triumph. Ownership of artifacts and research rights remained with the community. Contrast this with early 20th century expeditions that looted indigenous relics under the guise of preservation, divorcing objects from their cultural context. The difference is consent. Modern partnerships like the Ungarangeri Nation's involvement in studying Australia's Murray River floods prioritize indigenous leadership, ensuring stories are shared on their terms. The danger of distortion looms large when myths enter mainstream discourse. Hollywood's portrayal of Noah's Ark as a global event erases regional flood narratives, while New Age reinterpretations often strip indigenous stories of their specificity, mashing them into generic, ancient wisdom. Linguist Dr. Joycelyn Rainfield notes how Cherokee flood accounts were mislabeled as Native American versions of Noah's Ark in early anthropology texts, ignoring the story's actual focus on ecological balance rather than divine punishment. This flattening isn't just inaccurate, it perpetuates colonial patterns of extraction, where cultural heritage becomes raw material for outside consumption. Yet respectful engagement yields extraordinary insights. When Maori oral historians partnered with geologists to study the Te Tai Orehua tsunami tradition, they didn't just provide a date for the event. Their detailed descriptions of wave behavior helped model ancient seismic activity along New Zealand's Hikurangi Trench. The key was reciprocity. The research team trained Maori youth in both Western geology and traditional star navigation, creating a bridge between worldviews. Similarly, Yupik elders in Alaska corrected scientists' assumptions about coastal erosion by sharing ancestral hunting songs that referenced now-vanished landmarks, redirecting archaeological surveys to areas their ancestors had identified as flood-prone. The emerging best practices are clear. Credit indigenous knowledge as peer-reviewed evidence, not anecdote, involve communities from hypothesis to publication, and honor restrictions when certain stories are deemed too sacred for external analysis. The Choctaw Nation's recent collaboration with climatologists exemplifies this. Their flood narratives guided core sampling in the Mississippi Delta, but ceremonial flood songs were documented only with select phrases, respecting their ritual significance. As Dr. Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart, a Lakota scholar, reminds us, oral traditions aren't just data, they're the veins of cultural memory. Handle them with the same ethics you would a human heartbeat. This isn't merely academic courtesy, it's a corrective to centuries of exploitation. When the Tlingit people's flood stories led to the rediscovery of glacier-dammed paleolakes in Alaska, the resulting paper listed tribal historians as co-authors. In Brazil, the Munduruku people now vet all publications referencing their megaflood legends, ensuring profits from books or documentaries fund community schools. These measures acknowledge a fundamental truth. Indigenous flood narratives aren't puzzles for outsiders to solve, but ongoing dialogues between peoples and their environments. As sea levels rise again, the wisdom in these stories, shared equitably, may hold survival strategies no scientific model could replicate. The question isn't whether these traditions have value to the wider world, but whether we're humble enough to receive that value on their keepers' terms. Hollywood's obsession with apocalyptic floods didn't begin with computer-generated tsunamis. It taps into a primal fascination as old as storytelling itself. Consider Atlantis, the Lost Empire, Disney's animated dive into Plato's sunken kingdom, where advanced technology and hubris meet a watery grave. The film's climax, with tidal waves swallowing marble towers, mirrors the philosopher's original dialogue almost beat for beat, a civilization punished for its arrogance by the sea. But here's the twist: modern audiences cheer for the explorers who salvage Atlantean wisdom, reframing the flood not just as destruction, but as a buried treasure hunt. This shift reveals how ancient cautionary tales get repackaged for an era obsessed with rediscovery. Blockbusters like 2012 take the opposite approach, weaponizing flood myths for spectacle. Director Roland Emmerich didn't just borrow from Mayan prophecy. He spliced it with Younger Dryas impact theories, creating a pseudo-scientific cocktail of asteroid-triggered tsunamis and arcs built by billionaire backers. The film's absurdity, a cruise ship outracing a Himalayan-sized wave, belies its clever manipulation of real anxieties. Climate change headlines and doomsday prepper subcultures had already primed audiences to imagine their own world underwater. By grafting ancient flood tropes onto contemporary fears, 2012 turned millennia-old stories into a $791 million box office adrenaline rush. Yet some adaptations dig deeper into the psychological marrow of these myths. Noah 2014, Darren Aronofsky's controversial take on Genesis, frames the Ark's construction as an eco-parable. Russell Crowe's Noah isn't just a righteous man, he's an eco-terrorist, convinced humanity's extinction is the only cure for planetary abuse. The film's hallucinatory imagery, like skeletal crowds drowning in torrents, channels the visceral horror absent from Sunday school flannel boards. Critics called it blasphemous. Environmentalists hailed it as a wake-up call. This polarization proves flood narratives still hold provocative power. They're Rorschach tests for our deepest ethical dilemmas. Beyond cinema, flood myths fuel conspiracy theories with alarming potency. The ancient apocalypse crowd obsesses over Graham Hancock's claims of a pre-Ice Age super-civilization, its ruins now underwater. YouTube algorithms amplify these ideas, splicing satellite images of underwater formations with dramatic narration about hidden histories. Never mind that geologists debunk most of these sites as natural formations, the allure persists because it flatters modern vanity. If Atlantis existed, then maybe our own civilization isn't the first to reach technological heights or make catastrophic mistakes. Literature, too, reimagines these waters. Margaret Atwood's Mad Adam trilogy envisions a biotech-driven apocalypse where engineered viruses and rising seas collapse society. Her genius lies in reversing the myth. Instead of divine punishment, the flood is human-made, the Ark a bunker stocked with privileged survivors. Even children's books like The Storm Whale distill flood themes into tender metaphors for loneliness and rescue, proving these stories scale effortlessly from epic to intimate. Why do these ancient deluges still captivate? Because they're the ultimate blank canvas. A flood can symbolize climate change, divine judgment, or societal reset with equal potency. Filmmakers and authors keep returning to this well because it never runs dry. Each generation sees its own reflection in the rising waters. The next time you watch a disaster movie or read a dystopian novel, listen for the echoes of Gilgamesh or Manu. The names change, the special effects evolve, but the story remains the same. The sea always comes, and we keep trying to build something that floats. The ocean floor remains one of Earth's last great frontiers, a vast museum of lost histories waiting to be decoded. Emerging technologies are now poised to revolutionize our search for the submerged origins of flood myths, starting with autonomous deep-sea drones like the University of Sydney's RoboClam. Inspired by mollusk burrowing techniques, these nimble robots can penetrate layers of sediment that have shielded ancient coastal settlements for millennia. Imagine one uncovering a Neolithic village off India's Konkan coast, its tools and hearths preserved in oxygen, deprived mud, physical proof of the floods described in the Rigveda's tales of Manu. Or picture a swarm of MIT's SoFi soft robotic fish, silently mapping underwater caves in the Black Sea where refugees from its great deluge might have sheltered, leaving behind charcoal or carved symbols. Even more transformative is paleogenomics, the study of ancient DNA. Scientists at the University of Copenhagen are now analyzing sediment cores for environmental DNA, traces of genetic materials shed by humans, animals, and plants thousands of years ago. A single gram of seabed mud could reveal when domesticated wheat suddenly vanished from the Persian Gulf's flooded plains, or identify the genetic bottleneck of a population decimated by rising waters. Off Japan's Ryukyu Islands, researchers have already isolated human DNA from limestone caves that were dry land during the last ice age, confirming oral traditions of ancestral migrations triggered by sea level rise. The hunt for evidence isn't limited to technology, it's also a race against time. As climate change accelerates coastal erosion, sites like Beringia's submerged land bridge are crumbling before we can study them. Here, laser ablation tomography offers hope. By vaporizing thin slices of artifacts with lasers, archaeologists can analyze their chemical composition without damaging them. A single waterlogged wooden post from a drowned Alaskan village might reveal tree ring patterns matching the Tlingit flood stories, while isotopic analysis could trace whether survivors resettled inland. Perhaps the most tantalizing frontier lies in decoding the symbolic language of myths themselves. AI-powered linguistic analysis at the University of Oxford is comparing flood narratives across 4,000 languages, identifying mythic signatures, recurring phrases that might point to common origins. Early results suggest certain metaphors, like "the earth drank the sea," appear in unrelated cultures that experienced post-glacial flooding. Meanwhile, virtual reality reconstructions are letting historians walk through digitally recreated flood events, testing whether details like the Bible's 40 days of rain or the Maya's resin deluge match known meteorological phenomena. The unanswered questions loom large. Did the flooding of Deucalion inspire the Celtic myth of Catastrophe? Will we find the missing link between the Black Sea deluge and Mesopotamian flood tablets? Every new discovery raises fresh mysteries, like last year's baffling sonar images off Cuba's coast, showing geometric patterns at depths suggesting they predate known civilizations. As deep-sea mining and cable laying encroach on these fragile sites, the urgency grows. The next decade may finally reveal whether Plato's Atlantis was pure allegory or a ghostly memory of a real Bronze Age society swallowed by the Thera eruption's tsunami. What's certain is that these aren't just academic puzzles. As rising seas threaten modern cities, understanding how ancient cultures adapted or collapsed holds urgent lessons. The same technologies probing the past could help predict our future, whether it's AI modeling how flood myths spread or underwater drones identifying vulnerable coastal archaeology before it's lost. The waters that shaped humanity's oldest stories haven't finished speaking, and now, for the first time, we're learning how